Yep, you're all good, Nick.
All righty. Hello, everybody, and how are you doing this morning? It is a super hot Thursday here in Philadelphia. Oh, crap. Sorry, hold on. But I'm really excited to be here. This is the first time I'm giving this talk. I just finished cobbling all of my thoughts together for this past weekend. And got a chance to talk through some of it with my team, and everybody's pretty excited. So the very first thing I want to do, just to sort of set some expectations on all this, is this is very imperfect. It's meant to be like a very quick and dirty approach. I'll talk at parts about how you can significantly increase the statistical significance and the confidence intervals by using just additional data. But the whole idea here is if you're trying to explore like an expansion of your total addressable market, or you're trying to plot out blue ocean around some giant top of funnel content strategy, or you're evaluating buying an affiliate business. I mean, there's a million reasons and business cases you might want to be able to just sort of slap together a set of projections like this. And it will at least let you do that. So without further ado, this is how to project revenue from organic search without being a data scientist, with or without historical data. So this is what most forecasts look like. And in all honesty, projections are mostly bullshit. However, they make for a more relatable story. They give us context to speak to, and they make what is otherwise completely intangible, at least somewhat more tangible in terms of if we make this investment, if we spend this money, if we create this content, we deploy this strategy, all these things, what might we actually expect to see in terms of our individual return or the return on that specific investment across all those channels. So they give us numbers to frame the context of the discussions we're having when we're trying to sell the business or sell the investment of content strategy or large content investments. So I'm Nick Eubanks. I'm the founder of Advanced Digital Media Agency from the Future. I'm a partner at Traffic Think Tank. I'm a GP at Super Limited Co. I built and sold a whole bunch of crap. And most importantly, apparently, as of sometime this week, this is now how I'll be identifying myself, because if Eli Schwartz is the product-led SEO guy and Annie Cushing is the audit queen, and apparently JH calls himself the B2B content strategy guy, then I'm going to start calling myself the keyword research guy. So just going forward. And the reason that is important is because keywords are the baseline for projecting all organic performance. You can't do projections, especially on organic. I mean, sometimes with paid, there's ways to finagle in and reverse engineer based on spend levels, but in organic, if we're talking about organic performance, from your content, which is what I'm talking about, keywords frame the entire conversation. And so when we combine keyword heuristics with metrics, so heuristics would be like brand versus non-brand, with metrics like average search volume, number of clicks, average traffic per non-brand organic keyword. It allows us to benchmark all of these averages. And benchmarking is extremely important, right? Because without benchmarking, we don't have any foundation to project growth. And the nice part about doing benchmarking is there's sort of a different way to think about it. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. Is it's not always just a line in the sand. If you can grab a handful of historical data, even if it's from third-party sources, because you don't have direct access to real website keyword data and performance data, traffic data in those spaces or verticals, you can still take those subsets of time-bound, time series data and combine it all together and get an average or standard deviation and use that as your baseline. There's still ways to get cleaner break lines when you're trying to figure out like what is the average amount of traffic we get per non-brand organic keyword, which is specifically what I'm going to talk about. So like if we know how many visits that we get on average for our non-brand organic keywords, and we can literally look and say, here's where we ranked on average, or here was the average ranking based on GSC reporting for that term or that bucket of terms that are all, we know that URL ranks for. Specifically for last month, we know that that keyword on average gets 3.7 visits per month. And drives each of those terms drive those click amounts. And if we spread that out across the entire sample set of brand versus non-brand, you can begin to extrapolate into what is even sometimes very conservative numbers that can make a very big difference. So based on difficulty, we can estimate how much we might be able to grow that baseline. And here in this instance, I'm talking about keyword difficulty. So, and back to the point I was just going off about, even conservative growth over time, and this is what I'll show you, can have really big results. So this is a different approach. This is what I'm going to show you essentially how to build. And so creating a baseline, taking a look at difficulty, adjusting potential growth rates based on that, and then using that to go forward. But again, it all starts with this point that I'm going to belabor a little bit with your keyword data. So this is what your keyword data needs to look like. If your keyword, if the way that you're managing your keywords and putting them together, aggregating that data, the way you're thinking about keywords in terms of the data sets that you're dealing with, if it doesn't look like this, you have a lot of blind spots. And the thing about this is it's not hard to do that. This is almost entirely all third-party data. I think it's actually in this one, literally. Yeah, this one is, it's literally, so it's all data that we're able to pull from third party and organize and categorize and clean up, because the data that we're using for all of this and the baseline for all these projections and keyword data, it needs to be accurate, relevant, and very well organized. Again, back to this, it's more about the categorization. Like, we need to know what we can, whether we're inferring intent, we're creating hubs and spokes to try to at least put these into the funnel stages, map them to content more effectively. It all comes down to, the original organization. So because we're recording this and this will be available later and the deck will be available, here's a very simple approach just to get you to almost here, which is, and I'm not going to read through this, but just as a general basis, I thought this was a necessary thing to mention. So all the data in here is going to be for a company that does exist, but it's not actually called the name of the company that I'm using. I'm calling it Everything But Cakes. And they sell cakes. So again, not a real company because it'd be the worst name ever. But for this imaginary company that I'm going to use for all these data examples, you would identify a foundational list of keyword modifier patterns. Like that's what you need to be starting on. What are the modifiers? What are the prefix or suffix terms that you can add to your query classes or add to your keywords that change the underlying intent? And let you infer where that person, where that searcher is, within their customer journey. Then you can use hrefs and you can pull every variation of keywords that have those modifiers, that include those modifiers. A great example would be like modifiers for our imaginary company here, Everything But Cakes, would be bunt cake, or every keyword that includes bakeries in for like locational, like geographic specific keywords. So finalize your list, comb through it, and then start all your categorization. One thing that is a bit of a pro tip, especially if you're doing this for like quick and dirty sorts of modeling, is only pull keywords that the competitors, that your direct competitors in your space rank in the top 10 positions for. It'll keep your list from getting completely out of control really fast. But above all else, you need to be tagging your keywords specifically for brand. This is probably the biggest thing. I mean, any agencies worth their weight in anything is going to be doing this, but I still see a lot of keyword research not doing it, and I don't see it baked into the projection model, like the considerations of brand versus non-brand. Because how are you going to project revenue accurately if you're not doing the brand versus non-brand separation? Because the conversion rates are going to be so drastically different between those two. But the good news is, if you are at least tagging for brand and non-brand, you still need to make sure that you're rolling this all up. Because remember, the whole idea, everything behind all of it, the reason to do all the projections is because you're selling SEO, whether you're selling it to senior leadership, whether you're selling it to your business partner, whether you're selling it to your clients, you have to get the buy-in, and the nitty-gritty details don't work most of the time. Where like this looks great, this is a nice consolidated view for how to present this, and this only comes from having very well organized keyword data. Because it was nicely tagged, we can break these all out very quickly. But this even is likely to not be as effective for the conversations with senior leadership, where you would want to have projections to bring to the meetings, as something as simple as this, which is, what's our TAM? What's the search volume of that TAM? And if we were out to go out and buy all those clicks, what would we have to spend? Because the only numbers that are going to matter with projections, the only reasons to do projections is to have this slide. This is the only slide that anybody you're going to be presenting your projections to is going to give a shit about, which is, what's the traffic? What's the projected revenue? What does that mean for, per year? And what's that based on? So this one assumes an average order value of $105. And you can see the projected incremental revenue from this projection series is $12 million roughly over nearly 5 years. So The point being and before we dive in, I wanted to make sure I really set the stage here, is imagine showing up to your pitch where you're trying to get buy-in or sell SEO services, SEO consulting, SEO investment with this. This changes the nature of the conversation, because suddenly it's, hey, here's our estimated traffic. We've got non-brand terms converting at roughly 1.5% now, or versus 5%. And these are, you can get baseline averages if you're willing to pay for some statistics if you don't have those conversion rates. But ideally, it's something that this whole model is based on having just 3 months of data. You can do it without any data, which I talk a little bit more about. But and then there's ways, like I sort of had mentioned in the very beginning, there's ways to make this significantly more accurate that I'll speak to as well. But this was the main point, right? It's like this is the meat and potatoes. You know, if you're able to have your conversations when you're pitching investment and content strategy with a table like this, that's based on, like, that backs all the way into real data. It's not just a bunch of numbers you made up. And because your keyword data is so well organized, you can speak to the actual impact from brand and non-brand, how many customers, organic and non-brand organic, are actually going to drive, and what that means in terms of, you know, the actual bottom line. Because your keyword data is so well organized, you're able to speak to how the content strategy that you're designing is actually going to support each step of the funnel within your total addressable market, and how much value there is to unlock within each of those pieces. So before I dive into the really nerdy stuff, just think about that for a second, how being able to do this and this would change the complete nature of the conversation that you're having, where you're pitching however much money you're pitching for in terms of investment in SEO. And now we're going to get really nerdy. Remember, nobody's a data scientist here. I'm not a data scientist. I'm not even that good at math. So it's simplistic. It's going to feel a little heavy at times, but I promise it's actually pretty simple. If I go through it fast, it's just because I'm trying to leave some time so we can talk about it a little bit more after this. So without further ado, this is what our projection model looks like, with or without real data. This one that we're using here, we took 3 months of real data. So here I've got actuals with Ahrefs, which I married up later, but that's where those first 3 columns at a minimum would be where you would drop your baseline data. And if you notice here, it's not a whole bunch of GA data. This is literally all data that is completely available from third party, with the exception of the conversion rates, which you can project, and an average order value. Again, you can set that wherever you want. It's a variable field. The more important part, right, is the breakout of how we're getting to the averages to set our baseline and to figure out if this is our baseline and these are our averages. These are the averages we're seeing on the competitor sites that are very similar for these terms with these difficulties, or within these keyword difficulty buckets. These are the growth rates that we believe we can project and sustain over time. So everything we just looked at is breaking into a few smaller pieces. So the methodology behind this are the data sources, our Ahrefs, Google Ads Keyword Planner for some of the search volume terms, which I use for some of the organization, but it's not a big part of the projection model. Keyword KEGG for SERP feature data to actually map the CTR curve, or promote the CTR curve, and then assumptions made for the projections for this specific case. We've got non-brand at 1.5% conversion, brand at 5%, and then our projected monthly growth rates by keyword position grouping. So we believe we can grow position 1 rankings by 1%, and position top 3 rankings by 2%, top 5 by 4.5. Those are based on adjusted keyword difficulty for each of those, with an average order value of $105. So back to benchmarking. The benchmarking, the model that I like using, it's the easiest one, and this is sort of a bastardized version of it, again, because we're using third-party data. You want much longer data sets, ideally, of actual historical data, because and there's the nice part about that is then bigger data sets let you use some of the other projection models that do a much better job actually normalizing and adjusting the spikes and curves for outliers. So again, so this was quick and dirty, but so using a linear regression model and just trying to add in some adjustment for seasonality if we're able to, and you'll see what I mean. The longer the time series, the more accurate the data is going to get. It assumes there's trends and seasonality built into it, and it's wildly susceptible, obviously, to outliers. So like if you are on a site and you get smashed with an update for whatever reason, or an update like completely skyrockets your traffic one month, those outliers are going to completely F up a linear regression model, unless you've got enough data. Like again, unless you've got probably 24 to 36 months of data of actual historical data where you can normalize, for the seasonality based on whatever the swing would be there from like the standard deviation versus the norm. But again, quick and dirty startup style projections. So when you have very limited data, you've got these sort of three scenarios that I tend to put them into. So, and obviously the confidence interval goes down significantly with each one. So your idealistic minimum would be you'd have 12 months of actual historical data. With 12 months, you should be able to get close to a 90% confidence interval if you use linear regression analysis and you account for seasonality and you project 12 months forward. If you only have minimum would be 6 months, and then your ultra lean, the one that I built this sort of example around, would be at least 1 quarter. And if you're a very seasonal business and like you're a Christmas business and you only have the first year, you have January through March for the quarter of data, it's not going to actually help. So again, this is more about the conversation and the framework to get you thinking about non-brand organic and thinking about average traffic per keyword and a few other of these like little metrics that I think are great for quick and dirty projections to change the context of these conversations. So this one though, again, if you're using only third-party data, you want to find websites that are as similar as possible, and then find scenarios within those specific keyword scenarios within those websites to identify specific opportunity. So in order to get to a baseline, so you can actually do that benchmarking that I was talking about, you've got a core. It needs to be your benchmark metric, baseline metric needs to be correlated to your main KPI. And so our main KPI here is non-brand organic, because we're trying to project growth in revenue from organic, ROI from organic, but non-brand organic is the holy grail for SEO. So you need to dial in the estimated brand traffic per month and the estimated non-brand, and then same deal with the keywords. So how much organic traffic do you get per month for a brand, any one of your branded keywords across an average of all of your branded terms versus all of your non-branded terms? And then how is your CTR affected between the two as well? And if you think of everything in that lens of brand and non-brand, and you begin to break it out, you can see over here in this example, like non-brand is broken out into ranking buckets, because based on the just an analysis that we had done of a bunch of competitors, again, all third-party data here, was looking at how the way that their keyword buckets changed and the estimated traffic, just using, again, this is all Ahrefs data, so it's less than perfect. But it's a good barometer. This gives us at least the context to begin to understand, like, where are we going to see the growth in these terms, and what is the actual average of the standard deviations. You can see, like, we expect to see an average of 233 visits per month from a branded organic keyword that ranks in any of those buckets. And then each of those get adjusted for CTR, which is in the big spreadsheet. And then we expect to see literally less than a visit, so 0.84 in that January projection, visits per month for non-brand terms. And that's based on, again, taking just an average of what we're able to pull out at the super bare minimum, right? This is just, this was in March, this was done. So we're able to say, all right, what were all of the rankings and what was the split brand versus non-brand for Ahrefs for this site, or this collection of sites for January, for February, for March. Okay, cool. Let's take an average of those three for brand versus non-brand and use that as at least our multiplier for looking forward. And then being able to carry that forward and multiply the growth rate against the growth in term rankings that we think we can achieve in each of those term buckets, and then multiplying the term buckets by the CTR. One of the really important things that we learned over time when we were doing this, just through so many iterations of doing this to try to make it at least a little bit more accurate, is actually using the percentage of keywords that are brand versus non-brand as sort of a boundary for like stabilizing this data. So if you look at this top one right here, you can see that the percentage of brand keywords, when we did, again, that's actual data that we were able to get before the projection started. That scroll, right? So the percentages stayed the same. Actually, I don't know if I can show the actual thing on here. So yeah, perfect. So yeah, so you can see here, so these were the actual numbers. So we're able to pull through these percentages, like what was the actual percentage of keywords that were brand versus non-brand. And then, so these are actual numbers, and then these were our projected. And we just made sure, you can see here, it always stayed, it actually even goes down a little bit, but it always stays within that range. So we're never going completely crazy and going, way outside the boundaries of what the data was when we first pulled it and normalized it. Cool, let's talk to that, boundaries. So again, the final version of that sheet, it looks like this, where with everything rolling all the way up into brand and non-brand for averages. And then the projected growth rates that we set per ranking bucket are based on the average keyword difficulty adjusted to the average keyword difficulty of the entire bucket. of terms in that ranking, entire bucket of terms in that ranking bucket. And then the ultimate sort of deliverable thing that we're going to use to bring to the presentation, the projection roll up, if you will. Again, it's not sexy looking, but this is the thing that sells SEO unlike I've ever seen before, because it changes the context of the conversation. It shows that you're putting revenue from, your content strategy, revenue from content production first, sort of above everything else. And so again, like I said, I wanted to leave enough time for a bunch of questions. So that was it for my nerdy but hopefully refreshing, somewhat refreshing presentation. Curious if anybody has any questions.
Thank you, Nick. So yeah, if you have any questions, please type them in the Q&A. Nick is a fast talker.
Yeah, I tried to even slow down a little bit there. I just a hard time when I get excited.
Yeah, all good, all good. It may take a couple minutes for people to catch up and throw some questions in there. You may have some questions in your own mind, Nick. So, maybe you can start there if there are any particular points.
Well, I was gonna say, I'm happy to go back. Yeah, the bigger thing there is I'm happy to go back to any of these if people want to see them. And I'm also happy to provide like a version of this if people want to use it. The more historical you can drop in, the better. I will give a really big shout out to Andrew Charlton, futurethought.io. He has built a regression series model template using causal that does this like 15 times more accurately and is really sophisticated and fun to play with. It's definitely worth checking out if you want to go deeper down the rabbit hole of trying to project organic, especially if you're trying to back into revenue from organic. Yes, I will absolutely I make a copy of this template, and when Lloyd shares the slides out and everything else, so you guys can get it.
Catch that question there, Nick. Yeah, the question is,
see it.
Yeah, you want to read it?
Yeah, so Jim asked, do you have any suggested resources or courses for the type of keyword categorization that you touched on briefly? There's a bunch of people doing this right now. Suganthan and Andy Chadwick have a tool that's really cool. Runs on BigQuery, so it's a super lightweight. I can't believe it's called Keyword Insights. That does a whole bunch of automated categorization around like hubs and spokes. And then I know that Cody West also has one that's pretty impressive. In terms of like how to approach it without the tools, it's mainly creating rules within the industry. So like we work with a lot of automotive e-commerce companies. And so like we just have sort of these boilerplates, like we know that these 30 modifiers are always going to show commercial intent unless they're paired with these modifiers and then they're actually middle of funnel. So we want to reduce, the lead scores on those or the projected value on those. Yeah, I think that's a good answer now. How long does it take you to pull all of this data together? Surprisingly not long. I mean, like that's the thing is you can download, export the stuff from Ahrefs, the brand versus non-brand tag. Once coming up with the brand modifiers and then like doing a VLOOKUP to match those is actually super easy. Most companies don't have more than say 10 brand modifiers, maybe 15. So it's actually pretty simple and straightforward. In that sense, the non-brand modifiers, again, tend to be more general. So like as soon as you can figure out any of them that you can put hard rules around, like we know anytime we see what on its own, it's an informational query. Whereas if we see what in cost or what in price or what in buy, like if we see this with this, then it's actually this type of intent. And creating those rules once and then just adding to them over time, it makes it, there's economies of scale, obviously that build the more you do this, but it's not that bad, is my point. Podiatry clients helping them generate new patients. Oh, that's right, Jim. That's very cool. Yeah, this would probably be really useful for all the geo results. So like finding all the modifier patterns for like, podiatrists in, podiatrists near, podiatry clinics, like all of those different location queries would probably be pretty fascinating to figure out. As that's probably like podiatrist near or podiatrist in is probably a query class on its own. And then there's probably prefixes and suffixes around modifiers, best, cheapest, and then insurance names and all that fun stuff. But yeah, I can talk keyword modifiers all day. did that one. Is this better for SaaS or e-commerce? It doesn't matter. So the only thing with SaaS is going to be a little bit, you have to add like an extra like step or two, because with SaaS, depending on how sophisticated the like sales development process is or what the price point is on that SaaS. So if it's like lower market B2B SaaS, like sub $100, it's going to be much easier than if it's like an enterprise SaaS with like a 6-month sales cycle, when you want to actually counterweight, like, all right, these terms we know generate marketing qualified leads and they're worth $8 each, versus these terms which generate sales qualified leads, which we know are worth $55. I'm making up like stupid numbers, obviously. But you could adjust the funnel stage. You could probably adjust the conversion rates for like MQLs versus SQLs. But as long as you, I mean, if you have an LTV, you can use an LTV for enterprise software. The numbers are just going to be huge. It's going to be like, look, we'll add $150 million to your total revenue next year, because you know the LTV is probably for any big enterprise software company is probably 5 to 7 years. So that would be the only consideration, I guess, on like in terms of the SaaS piece. It looks like you include your growth rate in specific non-brand buckets up at 5. How do you determine these numbers with confidence? The growth rates. Yeah, so that's based on, so that we pull the average keyword difficulty of all of those keywords and then take the mean for that. And then based on the average difficulty of that, and then the average like DR, give or take, like domain rating of the site that's ranking, like the average DR of the top 10, and then the average KD of that entire bucket of terms, to figure out like where's our rough baseline from a domain perspective. And if we're like much stronger on the domain like base weighting, or we've got the content depth established, like there's some thresholds to consider. So like a content, like most like minimum content depth I'd want on a topic probably for any website that I was trying to go rank things for at this point. And this just goes up from here, but like minimum baseline is probably 50,000 words on a specific topic. And you know, depending on which verticals you're in, that balloons very, very quickly. But the consideration of like, you know, how are we on topical content depth for that bucket of keywords, average difficulty, and then if there's any, you know, base link gaps. But like the keyword, like this isn't the keyword research part. I guess that was the reason I was belaboring on it so much, is like you have to do your keyword research really well in the beginning. And if you know the terms that you're going to prioritize, and the prioritization is based on considerations of investment and competition, you can then bring the data of like, you know, we believe we can, like, these are the terms we're going to go after, and we believe we can grow at this rate based on these terms. This is just giving you a format to present that information in. I don't think that one was for me. I don't think that one's for me either. Thanks for that. On projections for non-brand keywords, do you categorize keywords into top, middle, bottom funnels? Yes, we do. We don't show that in the projection sheet, but it's part of the keyword research. So like here, for example, so this is all, again, like the roll-ups, but here's it actually broken down based on the categorization. So like if I go back to, there we go, this sheet here, you can see right here, the 1, 2, 3, 4th column over, this intent column is actually one that's being scored. So that's mapping based on modifiers. So we're doing like that. That's a formula column that's looking at the keyword and running through like a macro within Google Sheets. That's like, hey, does it have all of the, like, does it have these words? It's brand. Does it have these words? It's informational. Does it have these words? It's transactional, commercial, investigation. So that's the part that makes it there. And then again, that's not a useful view. So we report on it this way, right? Which is if we're going to super simplify the organic conversion funnel, and like, again, for enterprise software, there's probably 7 stages. But this is an easier way to think about it in terms of just like, where are the terms, what's the volume, and then like, what's the relative value per click, even to get a sense of, you know, what they're missing out on a monthly basis. Sorry if I missed this, but how did you put keywords into the potential ranking buckets? Oh, I didn't put them into those buckets. That's like real data. So for these ranking buckets, like we're pulling the actual rankings. So like this is downloading all of the keywords from Ahrefs. So right here for January would be 66,481, running them through just a categorization in Google Sheets for brand versus unbrand, and then breaking out all the non-brand terms, literally, because we're exporting all the rankings. Like how many number 1 rankings are there? How many are there in the top 3, including number 1? How many are top 5, top 10? And then just deduping to make sure we're not adding them all up in the aggregate. At the bottom, but yeah, literally just all data that's just being given to us from Ahrefs. Does that data come from Ahrefs or using Google Ads Planner? The volume, any volume in CPC data, we're going to be using from the Ads Planner API. But I mean, all of the organic traffic, organic estimated organic clicks, brand non like all of this, almost everything here is coming directly from Ahrefs, with the exception of the desktop, mobile, and blended CTR curve up top there in the corner. That's from Advanced Web Ranking. They just, in my opinion, they maintain the most up-to-date data set across all the devices. That cool.
Hey, Nick, so I got a question too. So at what point would you suggest people going through this exercise? And is this something that you're doing on a one-time basis, or are you doing it like regularly?
I mean, we keep it updated. The longer you update them and keep running it, the more accurate it gets. The other thing that Andrew Charlton talks about a lot, that I didn't think I'd have time to get into today, but maybe I would have, is talking about how you actually adjust for the difference. So it's like, hey, like this was our projected, this was our actual, this was the variance. Like, how do we flatten that variance out and use the variance as a discount rate for like what we're projecting next month? There's a separate model. It's like a standard deviation adjustment that you layer on top of linear regression. So it would just be like an extra formula we would apply to all of these that would like soften the edges for that, like that type of consideration. So like this is one where, you know, you have an analyst or something and they're in-house. We want them updating all these numbers every month, because then, you know, ideally you update it, that adjustment range gets narrowed. You try to get, you get more and more accurate in terms of your variance. And maybe you need to put a standard deviation into what the variance is to just adjust, you know, based on like, hey, now we've been doing this for 12 months. This is what we thought things were 12 months ago. This is where they're at now. If we run this season linear regression analysis over the full 12 months, it's actually showing that our average growth rate is here. Let's adjust our annualized baseline down, and then we can put up or down kickers in for like seasonality. Which is another one of our folks asked, use 3 months worth of data to populate. How does this change if the client's vertical is seasonal? If it's seasonal, you need a full year. I mean, there's no other way around it. Your only hope there, if you're gonna, is to try to download the past 12 months of data from Ahrefs for the closest competitors, look at their seasonality, use their data as your actual data for like previous 12 months, use that to come up with your averages and set your benchmarks, and then base growth rate off of that as your new baseline. But yeah, there's nothing that says you can't just go take all your competitors' data and use that to come up with your baseline metrics, and figure there again, based on things like difficulty, domain rating, link gaps, you know, where you think you can get to from a performance perspective.
Any other questions for Nick before we wrap up? We still have a few minutes left, so please feel free to ask those questions. Here's one from Matt. How do you figure out?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this is an e-com client, and most of the time we use 3% for direct-to-consumer e-com. Like if we have no idea, we're just running projections. They actually, I mean, this is their the company this was done for the conversion rate for branded terms was 5%, so they gave that to us. So it's a little unfair in that respect. But generally 1 to 3% is what I like using for e-com, 1.5 to 3%. For like 3% branded, 1% for non-branded is usually relatively safe. And most of the time, if there's any adjustment that's needed, it's usually just that branded is much higher. Like a traffic safety store, our brand conversion rate was like 11% or something. It's something ridiculous.
How often when you're working with companies, do they have that kind of data to share with you versus they're simply not tracking it?
I mean, most companies have GA data for 12 months, and we can usually get the GSC data. Maybe our minimum to do, so we use a version of Andrew Charlton's, and we've just applied some of our own methodology for how to get data when it's hard to get from the clients. But that one you can do, project 12 months. If you have at least 12 months of data, historical data, you can project 12 months forward at a 90% confidence interval. And if you update it, within Causal itself, the confidence interval will grow. So if you have 12 months of data, it'll project 12 months forward. If you run it and update it with the accurate data for 12 more months at 24 months, I think it's now at a 97% confidence interval on projected organic for 12 months forward. And once you projected organic, again, it's really easy to reverse engineer sort of back into revenue numbers, as long as you use some baseline for what you make when people buy shit from you.
And I think you framed this earlier on as a tool to use for pitching if you're an agency, but
or even in-house. Like
right, right.
I've got a buddy who's in-house at a big software company, and he wants to launch like a really big campaign into like these software platforms that are very complementary to their tool, but not competitive, because he found like all this sort of SEO gold in this set of modifiers. And they're like, oh, it sounds expensive. It's not really, like, we don't think that's worth it. We don't think there's like, it's not super relevant. So why would we do that? And he was able to show like, hey, like, even if we look at just non-brand organic, even though you're saying this is not super relevant for these terms, like if we look at these topic buckets and what the performance we've seen for MQLs and SQLs before, here's how much traffic there actually is out there. Here's the difficulty level. Here's where we are. Based on these, I think I can move these rankings up at this relative amount of time, which will increase the CTR. So we'll see this much organic traffic. So we'll see this many more MQL. Like, you can work it all the way through. So like using this internally, especially for companies that are like super metric driven, like this is a fintech SaaS company. Like they don't give a shit. Like I was saying, like I think I beat the point, beat this horse to death pretty well. But like all the top brass actually care about is this slide. Like this is the slide that they want to see. They'll, the 99% of the time you're pitching to PE or something, this is the slide. Maybe their analysts will want to dig into it a week later, but most of the time it's like, not send me over all the raw data. Like they'll go through it themselves. This is all they care about. They just assume that this is all backed up by actual data and analysis.
Cool. Any other questions for Nick? Nick, you want to put up your contact info again? I think it was on your last slide here.
Oh, sure.
So if you want to get in touch with Nick, there is the best way.
Awesome, guys. Hey, Lloyd, thank you so much for having me. I've been really enjoying the talks so far today. Hopefully I challenge some people's beliefs on the usefulness of projections. So we'll see.
Yep. Appreciate it, Nick. We're going to take another 5-minute break or so people can run off to the restroom. So take 5 minutes, come back, and we will continue. Thanks. And if you're just joining us, we're on a short bathroom break. We'll be starting up in about 2 minutes with our next speaker, Rand Fishkin.